Well, good afternoon, and welcome back to another edition of Tapping the Wine Cellar. My name is Tim Devaney. I'm Director of Precious Blood Volunteers, which is a ministry of the Missionaries of the Precious Blood, Kansas City Province. And I am broadcasting live today from my basement office, even though I've got it well concealed. So welcome to everybody. This afternoon, as normal, we have Father Keith Branson, the priest of the Kansas City Province, the Missionaries of the Precious Blood, who is joining us from Liberty. Good afternoon, Father Keith.
Good afternoon, Tim. Good to see you.
And it's good to see you too, Father Keith. And we also have Vicky Otto, who is the Director of Companions for the Precious Blood, for the Missionaries of the Precious Blood in the United States. And welcome, Vicky. And she's broadcasting from Kansas City, Missouri.
From my dining room.
It looks like a very pleasant dining room, Vicky. So today we're going to be talking about the readings. Well, as is normal, we're going to be talking about the readings for this weekend in the liturgical calendar from the Roman Catholic Church. So we're going to start off as we normally do with Father Keith Branson. And in the comment section below, I'm going to put in the links to the readings for the weekend from the U.S. Conference of Catholic Bishops. And you're welcome to share any thoughts you have or questions or comments or whatever you want in the comment section, which is for some of you will be right below the video. And for some of you, it will be right on the side. So Father Keith, while I'm posting the U.S. Conference of Catholic Bishops website information, I'm going to have you start us off.
All right. Thank you, Tim. It's good for you to join us again today. I hope you found us. When the link comes up, don't be afraid to make comments. Shoot them right out there, because as we don't have a special guest today, so you are the special guest. So I know this is treading dangerous waters to tell precious blood people to be free to talk, but here we are. We're looking at the 12th Sunday in Ordinary Time, Cycle A. And since you probably haven't seen an explanation of what Ordinary Time means since January, this is to remind you that Ordinary Time is just the thing about time being ordered. The Church orders the Sundays outside of the major liturgical seasons. And the purpose is to give the main teaching stories from the different Gospels in the order they appear in the Gospel, and to expose the major portions of Paul's letters. And then Old Testament readings are chosen to go with the Gospel. So today we've got a great passage from Matthew 10, and we're in the middle of a commissioning scene where Jesus is sending the 12 apostles out 2 by 2 to preach in the cities of Israel. They're out to proclaim the good news. He's telling them what to expect. He's telling them what to prepare for. He's warning them that they're going to be persecuted. And we come in kind of in the middle of the story. We've been talking about coming in the middle of stories the past couple of weeks. He's telling them about being brought before authorities. And so he starts out today by saying, fear no one. Fear no one. And he's telling them that they're not alone. He's telling them that God is with them. They should be firm in faith. And he's warning them, not to try to hide in plain sight. But at the end, people take the last verses, if you deny me before others, then I will deny you. He's talking to his disciples that he's sending on mission. So it's a very specific instance that warning comes in. It's not a general warning. Persecution is a theme that's picked up by the first reading as well, talking about the prophet Jeremiah, who probably could have won the award for the most persecuted prophet in ancient Israel. Jeremiah lived at the end of the kingdom of Judah. He had this horrible message of having to warn everybody the end was near, and he didn't want to, but he did anyway because God led him to, and he suffered a lot because of it, but he kept his faith firm in God, and he trusted in God's goodness, and mercy. So there's the start. What do you think about the readings for today, Vicki?
When I look at the readings today, I really see this is they're gifts to people who consider themselves missionaries. They're gifts to people who consider themselves disciples, and they're gifts to people who consider themselves apostles. Because as you said, Father Keith, Jeremiah gave us a perfect example of even when we are at our worst and our most challenged, God is with us. But the gospel is the one that really intrigued me this weekend. And it intrigued me because of the line where he says, "What I say to you in the darkness, speak in the light." And I really, as I reflected on this gospel, I thought, would have been something if this was, for lack of a better term, our graduation to go forth as missionaries. This is a great go forth movement. Don't be afraid to speak out. Don't be afraid, to stand firm in your faith. One of the things that I learned about the community when this gospel was written, they liked to get in people's business. So the whole idea of secrets was really interesting because there really was there was no such thing as a secret. Everybody was in everybody's business. So basically, the gospel writer said, God is the ultimate patron of the community. He's going to uncover everything that needs to be uncovered. And has somebody, I'm sure everybody's parents, my parents taught me, and I'm sure your parents taught you, keeping secrets is a bad thing. So this was a really good thing as far as secrets. And then the last thing that I saw, I loved, was the image of the sparrow, because a lot of people don't recognize that the sparrow was basically the smallest, cheapest bird in the market. And it really is a good reminder, a really good visual image for us that even when we feel small, when we feel vulnerable, when we feel insignificant, God always loves us. So I love that image as well. And I don't want to hog it up, so I'm going to let Tim Tiffany talk for a while.
I'm usually the least talkative of the three of us. So, at least in this setting, I am. Normally, I'm one of the more talkative people, but I often defer to the wisdom of Keith and Vicki. So I'm kind of taking a little bit different tack. When I read this gospel, that first line, "Fear no one," that really jumped out at me. It was I was thinking a lot about the people who are protesting nonviolently for justice, for accountability of our public officials, and especially calling us to recognize our the sin of racism that is present, that is very foundational to who we are as a country, and as well as the violence that is very foundational to a lot of who we are, and something that is pervades pretty much every aspect of our culture. And there's people who are willing to put themselves, including people I'm close to, who put their bodies on the line for others, and calling for justice, and knowing that for a lot of them come from a religious background, where they're where I would assume they were hearing a gospel like this, and the gospels and the witnesses of the prophets, and saying that you have to call for justice, you have to demand it, and that there is a good chance that you're gonna get that someone is physically going to hurt you. I think a lot about the people here in Kansas City who were kneeling on the street and protesting, and were dragged off by the police. And the guy who is the Catholic worker in Buffalo who was knocked over by police and then ignored by a bunch of other ones until finally somebody paid attention to him. And these are people who are calling us towards living a better, more just life, a better, more just, calling us to have a better and more just society that recognizes that people of color, especially African Americans in the United States, are treated with justice and equality, and that when we respond to crime, that we look at how we can do that in different ways, that does bring about justice and mercy and peace and forgiveness. So when I read those Gospels, I thought a lot about that in particular, and how people really are sacrificing themselves for justice and for other people, for others.
Yeah.
I think one of the underlying messages of the gospel was Jesus was pushing his disciples, his followers, to go from just being a disciple, or has somebody described it, a learner, to be an apostle, to actually go forth and go out. And how intriguing is it in our world that that's kind of, for many of us, where we're at today. We've been learners all our lives, and now we're called to go forth.
Yes. And we never feel ready when we go forth. I mean, I dare say the first day on a new job, you have to wonder, gosh, do I belong here? Am I ready for this? I know that new parents always wonder whether they can handle the new life they've been entrusted with and feel inadequate for that. And I'm sure the disciples probably were saying under their breath, hey, come on, man, where are you sending us out for already? I mean, go yourself. I mean, you're the better one to say this. And yet he sent them. He sent them out while he was still on earth. And I think that's important. I think there's another important thing about the whole secrets bit, is that Jesus wasn't a hidden teacher teaching secrets to only be passed on in secret. He's telling his disciples they have to get involved in public action, and that God always works through public action. And that, so that, shouting from the housetops, Christianity is not a cult. Christianity is not a country club. It's not a fire insurance policy. It's the way to live. And it's the way to live with everyone else in the world. And unless we see it like that, then we really aren't getting it.
I can't help but wonder if Jesus is looking down at someone like Pope Francis, who's continually pushing us as a universal institutional church to say, get out of the church, get off the mountaintop, go down to the streets, go down to find the people. That, and Jesus probably is maybe shaking his head a little bit and go, wow, I gave you this instruction 2,000 years ago and you still haven't gotten it.
Oh, yeah.
But it also, as we look to the future, isn't it interesting? Like, for example, I firmly believe our own ministry in Chicago, the Precious Blood Ministry of Reconciliation, even though people would say it's not a church, I would say it is probably more of a church than many I've seen. And I think what an interesting world it might be if we start honoring those places where there's healing, prayer, reconciliation, all those messages that Jesus told us about. They're bringing them to life through their actions and through their love of others.
Yeah, I'd like to take a quick moment to welcome Pat Large. Hello, Pat, to joining us as you do almost every week. We appreciate your being here and listening to us. Again, if you have comments about anything we've said or have some thoughts about the readings, you're welcome to put those in the comments section below. And Father Keith, it looked like you had something to say. Maybe you did. I don't know. Maybe I'm reading too much into your body language through Zoom. Okay, I'm not.
You are. No,
I am.
I wanted to talk, okay? Hey, let's say, I think there's a good distinction we need to make, because when we think of church, we think of a building. And particularly in this COVID-19 time where we've been deprived of our buildings for a good bit. and we've been called to be church at home. We're, I would call the Precious Blood Ministry of Reconciliation, in some ways they are church, in ways that many aren't, but particularly their community. And I think that too many of our parishioners are hung up with being church and not with being community. And community implies a sense of belonging, that we belong together. And I think that's something that is really lost in our divided times. We belong together, and we tend to see ourselves as wanting to line up in our particular pews or our particular side of the church or a particular area of the church, and we're going to be ourselves and the heck with everybody else. Well, that's not what Jesus is calling us to do. This is a man who said, love your enemies and pray for those who hate you. And that's not just a passive, okay, I'm going to think these nice thoughts and say these prayers, and then when push comes to shove. But we're called to be in relationship to each other, and they do that very well at PBMR. And we try to do that in the Precious Blood community as a whole. I'm sure every religious community does that, no matter what church they're in, what banner they fly under. I'll stop there for the moment and let you all talk.
I was going to say, it reminds me again, I think I shared this last week. One of our companions, Connie Sweinmiller from St. Joe, says often that one of the problems with the institutional Catholic Church is we have more rules to keep people out than we do to let them in.
Oh, yeah.
Thanks, Vicki, for that. We do have a comment here from this guy who's going to be serving with us this fall, Nick. He's going to be here at Cristo Rey Kansas City High School in Kansas City, Missouri, which is, if you're looking for a great place to support, Cristo Rey Kansas City is an excellent place to support. Love them. And I love that we have volunteers there. So we have Nick said, hi, everyone, and hello, Nick. I really enjoyed what Father Keith said about Christianity in general, how it isn't an emergency fund or backup plan, but it is the way, and we should act like it is. Our faith should guide our actions always, and not only in intense or stressing situations. So thanks, Nick, for that comment. Any follow-up with that, Father Keith or Vicki?
No, I think thank you, Nick, for getting the message. Thank you. Look forward to meeting you.
Well, and yes, I look forward to meeting you too, Nick, if we ever get out of quarantine and can actually see each other in person. A terribly exciting prospect. But I think Nick brings up a very good point, though, about faith. As Catholics, I know, heavens, in my own family, we reach out to God more often when we're in a pickle, so to speak, and need some extra help. But when things are going along great, we kind of ignore them. And when do we stop to say thank you? And when do we stop to say, God, I got here because you've been walking with me?
Yeah. It's like we used to call foxhole Christianity back when I was in college and in grad school. And there are a lot of foxhole Christians out there. But waving to Margaret, who finally joined us. Thank goodness. Hi, Margaret. Good to see you.
We will have momentarily our communications director, Margaret Hike, online. We're having some audio issues on at some point in the stream, but we're happy to have her back with us. So, Father Keith, could you kind of explain the foxhole Christianity?
Oh, sure. It's also, when you're in the foxhole, when you're under stress, when people are shooting at you, it's real easy to believe. It's been said there's no atheists in foxholes. And yet when we're not in the foxhole, when we're not being shot at, when we're not in trouble, then we forget God. So it's really very similar to what Vicki was saying. earlier. It's just a different generational term that I picked up when I was a kid back
And
in
I think,
ancient times.
but I also think that's the challenge of liturgy right now as we know it. You know, because for many people, the whole action of liturgy, gathering together as community, we really learned, you know, and I just absolutely despise the term, I have to fulfill my Sunday obligation, which makes it, I need the 60 minutes, me and Jesus moment, and then check, I can mark it off the box and move on with my life. So how do we build that community when we have to break that mentality? And if I
Yeah.
had answers to that, I'd be rich.
Yeah, it's almost a consumer mentality. You know, this is what I need. Where can I get the best deal to get what I need? Where can I get my Jesus in the way I like Jesus? And the trouble is, it's all about me.
Mhm.
When we have that point, it's like, okay, if I get so many bonus points built up on my credit card, then I get a free vacation to eternal life. And that isn't what church is. And that's not what church is for. I mean, when we leave this world and we spend eternity with God, we don't have to worry about that. But that'll be better than we can imagine.
Mhm.
But it's dealing with here and now we need God, and dealing with God in good times and bad times.
Yeah, one of the things that I'm kind of curious about with any of our people on the panel or with people who are watching us on Facebook is how do you build church? How do you build community? How do you be part of church in when you're stuck in your house? When a lot of the ways you normally build church, or are part of church, are not available. So I'm kind of curious from either the panelists or from people on Facebook what they think of that, what their experience has been.
I think COVID has offered us an extraordinary possibility to give new strength to the meeting of church at home. And it's not just the action of Sunday. How many of us have reached out intentionally to our friends who are isolated? I have a person who lives in California. She's 90 years old. She's been in a nursing home. She's in a nursing home. She can't get out. She hasn't seen her family in 6 months. How many of us have reached out to make phone calls to just say, hey, I'm thinking about you? How many of us have reached out to our families more intentionally than we ever have in the past because of this pandemic? How many of us have reached out more to our neighbors and people on the streets just with that random act of kindness than we ever have? I think those are all moments of church, and those are all moments of building community.
Ironically, I think a lot of building community is about how we spend our time alone. How often do we really examine our own consciousness, examine our own motivations for what we do? How often do we look at what effects our actions have on others? And that's something we have to do in the quiet. That's something we have to do in our alone time. And it's also, fasting from all of this contact. We have to convince ourselves of the value when we get back out again. We have to really feel how important that is. I mean, we all intellectually agree with how important it is. We talk about it. But if we don't feel it in our heart, it's going to be kind of hollow. And the time alone can really help prepare us. It's kind of like feasting and fasting. I mean, we're fasting for the sake of the banquet to come. And thinking about what that banquet should be like will help us. It can help us a lot.
Yeah, I really like how you
I also
frame that,
think,
Father Keith, with the fasting. That really resonates with me. Likening being alone with, and being in our homes, kind of stuck as fasting. I really like that frame.
I think, as I mentioned earlier, the gospel, the whole issue of disciples and apostles, you can't just be one or the other. You have to be both. And if you put more emphasis on one and and less emphasis on the other, you're not going to be very good at it. You have to take the time to be alone, to learn, to discern, to pray, so you can go forth. And so you've got to strike that balance in between.
Agreed, absolutely. We tend to see ourselves in one role at a time. And like we had 2 weeks ago, we talked about Trinity Sunday. God wants us to break down that particular barrier. We're all teachers and we're all learners at the same time. And it's kind of ironic, the greatest teachers there are the ones that love to learn the most.
I've challenged my family often because for many of us, our religious education stopped when we graduated from whatever religious institution you graduated from, be it elementary school, high school, CCD, whatever. When have we picked up a book about faith or spirituality, about Jesus? And I'm happy to say my relatives, I'm constantly getting emails from them saying, well, I read this one, give me a new one to read.
That's great.
Hi, guys.
Hey.
So I'm going to jump in here with a couple of comments. You all were talking about community and celebrating the liturgy. And Pat Large said, if the reason for me to celebrate the Sunday liturgy was about obligation, then I probably wouldn't bother to be there. So she's saying obligation is not enough to create that. And then Trudy Miller added, becoming Catholic in my late 40s, I never had the feeling that going to Mass was an obligation. I always wanted to be at Mass. Going to Mass for the first time since March 14th last Sunday at Most Holy Redeemer was tearfully wonderful. Trudy, I know what you mean. I sat through the Zoom Mass we did a couple weeks ago and had to turn off my camera. I cried through the whole thing being part of the community. And I'm actually dreading going back to Mass in person because I don't like crying in public, and I'm sure that I will just be a complete mess. Next.
I think Trudy brings up a good point that I used to say often about people who participate in the RCIA, the Rite of Christian Initiation for Adults. They often have a better understanding and a more up-to-date grasp about faith and spirituality than we, quote unquote, cradle Catholics do. So Trudy, I think, echoes a perfect example of that.
And speaking as someone who joined the church as an adult, I would agree with Trudy.
I'm going to jump in here again. Trudy says, Margaret, the Mass helps catch the tears.
She
gets a love reaction or heart reaction on that.
That's a good, that was awesome.
Thank you, Trudy.
That was awesome.
Okay, do we have any other thoughts going on here?
That's it for me.
Or what? I show up and you guys all stop talking.
Are we at
When
wrap-up time?
It's when the teacher shows up, we have to behave.
Oh, well, yeah. Been on both sides of that.
All right. Well, Father Keith said it right. It's wrap-up time. So, Father Keith, why don't you go ahead and go first?
Well, I want to say to change the subject briefly. This weekend will be Father's Day. And I want to give a shout out to all fathers out there, or biological fathers, adoptive fathers, mentors of all kinds. The three things that I found in my own father and in all good fathers I've known have been compassion and commitment and flexibility. There are a lot of fathers throughout the ages that have worked their keisters off for the sake of others, done everything they could, put their bodies on the line, and they have nothing but admiration from me. And if you want to wish me a happy Father's Day, fine, but get back to me on Buy the Priest a Beer Sunday.
That's great. Okay, Vicky.
I think we just need to, especially in these crazy times that we're living, remember what the ultimate message that this gospel says, and that is keep the faith. And remember, God is walking with us. And I think we just need to hold on to that.
And Tim Devaney, why don't you wrap us up today on that?
You know, as a person who sometimes gets strangulated with fear, I really see a lot in that gospel reading and that fear no one. And I think that that's something that, you know, as we go forward in seeking justice and mercy and forgiveness and peace, which is true reconciliation, that we push forward without fear. That doesn't mean go out without a mask on. I highly encourage people to wear a mask. Please do. Yeah, I'll give you a dirty look if you don't. But I will say a prayer for you as well, because I do love you and care for you because you are a child of God. But please wear a mask.
Yeah, Jesus says, fear no one, but he says nothing about germs.
Yeah.
Oh boy, guys. All right. So with that, everybody, thank you for joining us today. Tim, thank you for taking hosting duties since I was running late today. I appreciate it very much. I don't know if anybody can see this, but Tim's dancing on his screen. So anyway, we want to say that Tapping the Wine Cellar is a presentation of the missionaries of the Precious Blood Kansas City Province. We invite you to check out more at our website, preciousbloodkc.org/news. And we thank you for joining us today, and we hope you have a great rest of your week. Thanks.